A CD player, a photo album, a kerosene lamp in the 2000s in every Nigerian home. Kerosene lamp in particular provided jobs for thousands of people who sold kerosene. It was profitable. That's how they fed their family. That was their livelihood. Then government said, we're moving to LPG. It's cleaner, it's better, and it's more affordable. Everyone moved. And those people, the ones selling kerosene, no one asked. No one asked them what they should do next. Fast forward to now, the same conversation is happening again. Energy transition, solar, wind, and all sorts of renewable and clean energy. That's the conversation. But the same question remains unanswered. What happens to the people whose lives depend on the old system? Today's episode is with Duke Benjamin. His work revolves around the energy transition, not the policy side, not solar panels, but the most important side, the people. What happens to someone when their entire world shifts beneath them? Do they get pulled along or do they get left behind? This episode isn't about whether we should transition. We would. But what does the transition actually cost? Not in dollars, but in lives. And whether we've learned anything from previous transitions like kerosene. You're welcome back to Connecting the Dots. I'm Emeka Opara, and let's get into the conversation. Good day and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. I'm joined by Mr. Duke Benjamin, who has been in the power sector for a while, but I'm sure he's had other journeys. So, Duke, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here today.
Duke, you've been in the sector for a bit, as you just said earlier, but you seem to have come out of nowhere, right? Compared to when I joined the sector 12 years ago, you were working in Nigeria. Could you walk us through what you were doing and how you landed working in Nigeria?
Oh, yeah, sure. My background is environmental engineering and energy management, and I've always worked at the intersection between energy and policy. I started off with a German utility and worked there for about 7 years, running through a lot of positions, but then ending up as the head of energy services for a utility company in Germany.
Interesting.
Then I joined the foreign trade promotion arm of the German government, which they call Delegation of German Industry and Commerce, where my major work was then to matchmake between Nigeria and Germany, the business interests. In 2019, I joined GIZ, where I still work today. Currently, I'm the cluster coordinator for Just Transition and Inclusion, which is a very long term, which usually people don't understand what exactly I do. But starting with GIZ, I started off with a focus on climate and energy. With a number of projects working majorly supporting Nigeria with policies, regulatory framework, engagement with the private sector, and making sure at least renewable energies, energy efficiency, rural education are working in Nigeria. But I think it didn't take me long to understand, not only from my experience from Germany, but also in Nigeria, that there's one simple truth that connects social aspect of living of humans, so to say, with energy policies. So I believe energy policies is not just technical, but rather over years I came to understand it is simply affecting people's jobs, people's incomes, and everyday lives. And that choice made me start understanding or looking towards how do we make energy policies better for the normal man, easier to consume. So it then also shaped my future now being the Just Transition and Inclusion Cluster. So 4 years ago, when there was an opportunity to expand my work to lead the portfolio in GIZ Nigeria for social inclusion and stability, I saw a strong connection immediately and I took it up. So since then, I'm the Just Transition and Inclusion Cluster here at GIZ in Nigeria. And with my team of about 120 people, we work at different intersections: climate, energy, um, conflict affected areas, people that are displaced, supporting them, and also social protection. And we do all this majorly by creating a good framework for their living, but also making sure we have capacity building at all levels and making sure we bring private sector participation in everything that we do, because those are the ones that can sustain the livelihoods. But if you break it down to the energy sector only, for me, when you now talk about just, because the name Just Transition and Inclusion comes out of a just energy transition and the social inclusion and stability work that I'm doing. That's how they formed the name in the company. So, but for us, just transition on the energy basically means we try to work that energy systems, the way they are made in Nigeria, are reasonable and understandable for the average man, and it works for them, not against them.
Mhm. So it seems like your job is very nuanced. There's a number of different aspects of your job. I think the last time you and I had dinner was 3 or 4 years ago, and you were explaining how you had 2 or 3 other roles. This is just one of them. How are you able to balance running the NESP, right?
Yes.
And then also doing this and other aspects of your work.
Well, NESP stands for the Nigeria Energy Support Program. So I've been the head of Nigeria Energy Support Program since I started 2019 in GIZ. A while working on the portfolio climate and energy. And like I mentioned already, when the opportunity came to do the peace and security, stability, social inclusion, I took it up as well. Because I saw the connection. But of course, it is a tough thing.
You also work outside of the sector in peace and stability.
Exactly. So it's good governance. So even last year for interim, because most times, let me just answer the first question. How do I manage? I mentioned already we're about 120 people, so it's not me alone doing the work. It is by finding the right colleagues that take up the responsibilities, which we all share. And then, of course, it is the aspect that I find quite interesting is that I am not working only for one sector. So it allows me also as a person to understand the dynamics of a nation with in the different sectors and how the things are,
how they connect.
Mm-hmm. And then it allows you to always identify nexus between, let's say, climate change and conflicts, for example. And sometimes it allows you to be innovative enough to exactly at that nexus find activities that could help problems that we are really facing.
And I think what makes your role quite interesting is everything kind of ties back to your original work in the utility, because without for energy management and proper energy being available, all these other sectors will fall flat on their face.
Exactly. So I feel also that electricity or power supply, power sector is definitely one of the backbones of every economy. and then it really affects people, whether in their growth or with challenges that they have. So, and exactly that was this is the caveat, the thing that also attracted me to the other side is to just understand that if you solve the power problem, you're solving quite a lot of other problems socially. Yeah.
And just historically, GIZ probably 2015, 16 with the IMAS program. They were the first to jump in and really start doing mini grids.
Mhm.
And that has obviously led to a lot of mini grids in the country. I think the stat from the other day said that Nigeria is the largest country where there's the most mini grids being built on an annual basis. So we're really pushing this distributed renewable energy conversation, and I think it's fantastic. Well, obviously, we lose economies of scale. As a former utility person, why haven't we been able to really get that utility space right? Because if we do that quicker, then I think we can take the steps.
Yes, this is a very critical question, but let me just maybe come out the story, how you started the storyline. Let me say a few things to it, but then come to where we are today. So you're absolutely right. It's about 10 years ago where through a GIZ project, the Nigerian Energy Support Program, that's commissioned by the European Union and the German government, laid the foundation, the so-called mini grid regulation, together with the Nigerian partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that regulation over years now has led to what you mentioned. I think Nigeria on the African continent is the most dynamic off-grid market, right? And today, if you speak to Rural Education Agency, Ministry of Power and Co., there are hundreds of mini grids built in Nigeria, and serving also hundreds of thousands of people that now either didn't have energy access before or improving it. And you mentioned something that the IMAS, which we did back then. So what GIZ usually does, or what our commissioners asked us to do, is to create a market. And what we did then is to create the market by supporting that regulation, the environment, and then we did pilot projects. That IMAS you mentioned, Interconnected Mini Grid Acceleration Scheme, where then the pilot projects that were done in Nigeria, across Nigeria, to showcase that it works. And doing it was not only the regulation, we built capacity with the developers, the companies that are working. Now today, most of them are very big companies.
And
exactly. So after doing that, we went ahead to bring in money from our commissioners to make sure the first pilot projects are done and are seen that they can function. And since then, it's been scaling. The question about now getting utility right, I mean, there are lots of factors playing into it. I think maybe we all still need to do a little bit more of work with regards to the regulatory environment still becoming better, the electricity to become the financing, or let's say to raise the capital from the investors for them to find it attractive to invest, and for us to find good ways to share the responsibility of making sure the investments are safe. And that's one of the things I believe that will then bring it to the scale where we are all happy. I mean, I think during the course of our discussion, maybe we can go deeper into some of those questions. What exactly would both the government, the private sector, and we as Nigerians, so to say, everyday person, what will be the contribution of everyone to make sure this works?
Yes, and I think when people look at the power sector, they're always quick to blame the government, the discos and the gencos. But as someone in the sector, it's clear that people just need to pay their bills first and stop bypassing. Just let's try that for a year, and the sector will actually improve. I think it's a reality that people think the government should do first, but just do your part first. But we can get into that later. Pakistan 10 years ago had similar power issues, and they've been able to drastically grow using distributed renewable energy with obviously solar and the likes. Can we get that model here? Is it or are we stuck with saying if the grid doesn't work, we can't work?
Of course, that's a tough question to answer, but I mean, it's not only Pakistan, Indonesia, there are many of them examples that have done the same in the past decade or decades. Like I said, it's I can also give examples of other countries. I think the economics of electricity supply needs to be clear, needs to be clearly communicated to people. People need to understand what it means. And then we need to divide the responsibilities of the government, the private sector, the people, the civil society, the academia. And then we need to stick to it. There's one thing that I believe is a fact in Nigeria. Now that I also work a lot on social inclusion and stability, we definitely would always have people that cannot afford electricity, right? So that's on one hand. On the other hand, there needs to be transparency and clarity for investments in the sector, how the payment will come. A lot of countries still subsidize electricity, by the way.
Definitely.
Yeah. So also, where I feel we could do much better in Nigeria is truly to identify, first of all, to be clear about the transparency of investments, how the entire value chain works, who brings which addition, how much it costs, and be truly cost transparent. Then on the other hand, check about how affordable is it? Who are those that can pay? Where does government think you need to support people? I can give an example in Germany. Energy transition works, but you also see the subsidies coming in. Germany, for example, targets industries and households, right? In order to make sure the industries, because of price hikes, they do not break down, because these are jobs, and it's also, again, affecting the households. And then at some households where you know that the income is very low, you target them also to support them. I think Nigeria has done that in the past by having different tariffs in the country. The question will be how clear and transparent this could be. Yes. And let me give an example. That's part of our work on the social inclusion stability side. We have a project called Sapien Susi that is working majorly in the Northeast and so in Adamawa and Borno State, majorly. And they're supporting to strengthen the social system as well, part of the work, amongst other things. And they're forming social registers for the states and local governments and wards. And this will then inform the government if they want to subsidize anything, be it health. It doesn't have to be electricity, be it health, be it education, be it electricity. Then you will know who deserves to be subsidized. And then task those that are not on the better income side to make payments. And I think with that, this is usually how it works in systems across the world, where you have the real-time information about who you can subsidize or not. Because I think it will be difficult to go without subsidy at all, of course, because we have also the most vulnerable people in Nigeria.
Yeah, and I think we still have the advisory team did a development discourse focused on poverty last year.
Yeah,
that's 130 million Nigerians who exactly below the poverty line. So we have a lot of work to do. But I wanted to take a step forward, I guess, to really discuss energy transition. It's something that we hear people in the sector hear about it, but I'm sure if you ask your uncle in the village, he has no idea what energy transition means. Could you walk us through what that means? I know you've hinted at it a little bit. The first attempt was we gas will be fitted out. But then clearly that changed. So what does energy transition mean to the average Nigerian?
So for me, energy transition is a term that has been used for 1 or 2 decades now that is also tough to define worldwide. So on one side, for me, the definition is to move from more, I would say, climate damaging energy sources to cleaner sources. In countries or economies where they have almost 100% access to electricity, what they are doing for energy transition is move from maybe more fossil fuel to climate friendly instead. Now, if you fast forward and come to the continent, Africa or Nigeria, when we talk about energy transition here, because we have still a substantial amount of the population that do not have energy access. So the conversation for me includes energy access plus making the energy sources cleaner.
Okay.
So there is, from my point of view, also a lot of conversations around phasing out gas or definition of gas, whether it's now clean or not, moving from oil to gas, moving from gas to renewable. These are technology conversations from my point of view, and they have also their stand and their rights, because what we are trying to do is to save the planet so we still have a place to live. But for the common man, from my point of view, these talks will not help. They can't understand. So it still boils down to one of the reasons that moved me into working on the just transition and inclusion, still the social aspect and inclusivity aspect, because for the common man, it will translate to, will I have a job? Will electricity be affordable? Right? Can I pay for, will it be reliable? Right? And affordability is, I think, one of the major things that will drive. We saw in Nigeria 2023, once we removed the
For subsidy.
fuel subsidy, almost overnight, transportation costs, food prices, a lot of things will follow. Another aspect or example is when you go to rural places that never had electricity. Once you give them electricity, you will see increment in productivity. And their income will be better. Livelihood and everything. Yeah. So you see, that comes back to the same core question: how important is energy or energy transition? And for the layman, for my uncle in the village, so to say, it's about, do I have light? Can I afford the light? And is it reliable?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very good way to summarize it. Thinking back up on what you said, someone sitting in Canada is looking at, okay, the government needs to reduce how much coal is in the generating mix, or how much even gas in the mix, because they're trying to diversify to more cleaner sources. Shouldn't we in Nigeria and Africa really focus on access to our energy transition? Because if you think about it, even from the clean cooking conversation, if you're able to get half of Nigerians who don't have access to better cooking solutions off the firewood and into those stoves, that's a huge transition point. Rather than saying, oh, energy transition is this big word, we should focus on, we have to increase access first. It's a baseline.
So I think I already mentioned that for Africa as a continent, or for Nigeria, what I think we have usually between 80 million and 90 million we read that do not have access to electricity. Access to power or energy, whether it's clean cooking or electricity, remains key. I think we can do both. Coming to your question, whether we should concentrate on access or whether we should concentrate on clean,
Transition, yeah.
transition. I mean, the reason why the world, from my point of view, invented energy transition is that we've seen across board the development of nations over decades, what is now causing to the environment. So I think there is, of course, a challenge in doing it the cleaner way, but I believe that the energy access aspect of energy transition for an economy like Nigeria can still be done in a way that we are trying to make it climate friendly. So the question or the important thing would be, is it affordable? And how can we finance it? And these, I believe, are the major things we should look into. Because also, we are talking of off-grid or distributed renewable energy or, let's say, cleaner energy currently. And the reason why we are doing that, or why we're even talking of off-grid, is we've seen also in other economies over decades that decentralization is helpful. It's good to have central, but it's also good to have decentralization. I mean, people often use the word leapfrogging and co. I'm not a friend of that word, but I believe that we can already learn from the mistakes of others. So we could, at the same time, be central, but also decentralized in a very good manner where it is required, because it's a cost option, it needs to be affordable. We can take electricity grid of Nigeria through every village in the whole country. There are some villages that are so far that you spend billions of naira trying to get a pipeline.
The demand will not be
there. So I think Nigeria needs to plan it out, balance where you need to decentralize, bring in where you need large or intensive industries and need them to be on the grid. But at the same time, look at the opportunity of how do we make sure we do it sustainably and also in a renewable or, let's say, cleaner version. Whether if we are doing gas or whatever, it has to be as clean as possible, right? That's what I mean.
Well, that's a good point. I think our access numbers have increased in the last decade, but unfortunately, we keep increasing the population, so we don't quite see it. Want to just talk about jobs and energy transition. There's this big push, and maybe 20 years ago, to move from kerosene to LPG. And there were obviously thousands of people around Nigeria who sold kerosene. That's a job that has now gone because of the transition that has happened. I know we talk about green jobs and creating more jobs. In instances like this, how can we address that with the average Nigerian that knows that if I do X, that's considered dirty? Once that job goes, what do I do next?
This is also at the core of the conversation because this is what affects people's lives. I've mentioned jobs more times and income. So, and this is a very interesting question because people want security, majorly income security. I believe that if you look at what is happening in the world, it is expected that, let's say, fossil fuel related jobs are supposed to decline in the coming decades.
Yeah.
Nobody knows exactly when and how, or exactly when, but it is expected. But at the same time, we've seen in the past decade as well that there are new jobs that are coming up through renewables, energy efficiency, and many others, right? So what I believe is each community, government, country should create the opportunity for reskilling, for capacity development.
So that's back to like a Ministry of Labor or Who understands that? Who should lead that charge?
So the thing is, usually these things are driven when you realize the opportunity, right? We've done it in the past 10 years for the renewable energy sector, especially solar, together with Nigeria, the likes of NAPTIN, even Ministry of Education and Co. So once the opportunities come up, or if the country decides that they are going a particular way, as you're creating the policies for regulatory framework for private sector to engage, private sector requires skills. So at the same time, you're supposed to be making these things available. But specifically, what I'm driving at is if you have people that are, let's say, in the fossil fuel industry right now, what we've also noticed in the past decade is that most of them, you're seeing banks now having portfolios for renewable energy, for example, right? You are seeing traditional fossil fuel industries having their renewable energy arms.
Of course.
So they are transitioning already from my point of view because they are preparing for the new market. They are addressing it and they're addressing skills already in their company. So what I think that should be done in general is because every sector will maximize the industry and the human capital that is required until it comes to an end. But we should know when it is reasonable to start reskilling people for other opportunities. I've seen that happen also in Germany, for example. Germany phased out of coal in the past decade. Some of the coal communities, so to say, Germany invested the German government, billions of euros in reskilling some of them and also supporting the shock of the communities to make sure that if the coal plant that is employing everyone in that community goes, that people have something else to do.
So it just seems like there's a lot of coordination that's required to make this work. In Nigeria, who is coordinating these efforts? Is there someone or is there a group that's in charge of coordinating private and government?
So, I mean, from my point of view, I don't know the exact groups that are coordinating this, but this is ultimately where partnerships comes in.
Precisely.
Right? So government has a role to play. The private sector has a role to play.
Civil society as well.
Civil society, academia, and of course, development partners. So that's some of the things we've been doing in the past decade. If you are aware, the Nigerian Energy Support Program has trained over 1,000 people supporting high intellectual vocational trainings on solar installation supervision, things like mini-grid design, energy efficiency. And these are things we've done together with the Nigerian partners. So I think this is where how to create opportunities for people, for reskilling, or for educating them for the new opportunities. And I think globally, we have, the last time I saw numbers, about 13 million people that renewable energy is employing and is growing rapidly. So I think it is something that will come also very quickly. I think the most important thing is the decision to get involved in a particular sector or new technology, and then everything follows: the investments, the reskilling, and also the private people, or the not the private sector alone, but also the people, citizens. Yeah.
So, and I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to GIZ. From the point of view of NESP has consistently ran for 15 without any breaks, right?
Yes, it's
and
13 years.
And that's really impressive because it provides government a partner that will be there and guide them through the work. So that's something that is with our work, we see that NESP is always there. So that thank the German government for being very consistent.
Thank you very much for thanking the German government, but the NESP is also co-financed by the European Union. So I think it's to Europe and to Germany. Thank you very much for that. And we as GIZ, we're only implementing.
Interesting. Okay. So just back to the conversation on transition. Over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been various announcements around by 2060, all these things that the government is looking to do as far as energy transition. But all that comes at a cost. When you look at the numbers, you see estimates that we need over $1 trillion, actually almost $2 trillion to get to this net zero number by 2060. Who pays for this? I know you can probably afford it, but
no, I think ultimately it's a shared responsibility. So it will still be on the government. It will be on the private sector. It will be
the same government that just borrowed $1 billion.
Yes, because at the end of the day, I think everywhere in the world, it is private sector that finances the largest chunk, right, of any change, because they invest, but they can only invest when they trust that the investment will come back and they will have some dividends out of the investment. So my experience from energy transition across the world is still that it is everybody's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility. So government, we usually start with saying they've mentioned the targets. It's ambitious, right? So Nigeria also does not lack, let's say, ambition. Net zero 2060 is great. And Nigeria is also having solid frameworks. You can't say that we have energy transition plan in Nigeria. We have now the Electricity Act doing quite a lot of things. You have the Mission 300 that Nigeria signed up to, Energy Compact and co. So a lot of things are happening. So where there needs to be, from my point of view, additional resources is to implement the targets. And of course, implementing it would mean bringing everybody on board. Because what I notice sometimes is the same thing we're talking about any transition. There is usually a disconnect between the word, the reform, or the policy to the people, because the people still don't understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it needs to be translated in the right format to the people for them to understand, and then everyone can be back on the journey.
Okay. And I think that's a good way to surmise the efforts needed. It's no longer someone's going to show up to governments and say, bring this money, let's do this transition. Everybody needs to be part of the journey. And I think government at the end of the day should create that enabling environment. And once that environment is created, there's the probability that the efforts actually succeed is great. Because if you look at the telco industry, government created that environment and got out of the way. If you look at banking, they said, here's your minimum amount of cash you have to be a bank. If not, we're going to take your license away. And we can obviously say that 25 years later, banking is a completely different trajectory. So government really needs to be leading the charge.
Leading the charge, yes.
So part of the study we did, I think 4 years ago and next year, was looking at generators in Nigeria, how many generators there were, and the number is outstanding. I think it's like 40 million or some very ridiculous number. And the conversation was, why haven't people moved to solar on their rooftop? Because the sun's here, getting solar should not be that difficult, but it just doesn't seem like that has happened. So as we think about transition and getting people to think about energy differently, why haven't the average man or average woman moved to solar? Do you have a theory on that?
Yes, there are usually two things that move people to change. So my theory is, first of all, out of the two is energy prices might not have been hitting the people hard. So first of all, the prices for fuel or diesel were still interesting. That's one. Generators might be easier to purchase at the beginning, right? But I think we've also seen a shift since the fuel prices went up. People are moving more to renewable energy from my point of view. So it is the same thing everywhere in the world. Once it's reaching for your pocket, the money in your pocket, you also think it's true. So change is not easy for people. But I think as the energy prices are increasing to cost reflective tariffs or co, people will be thinking. You see, with even fuel prices, people reduce the number of cars on the streets, right? So I think changes happen when people feel there is a need for it. That's one. And I think public awareness together with financing of renewable energy sources is another part. So people might not know these things exist very well and they work well. There's also a time where I think there was some propaganda, it's not working and co. People might not yet be confident.
Well, was it that it's not working, or was it that the imports that came into the country were substandard, so it didn't work? And someone says, "Oh, that thing doesn't work. Leave it alone."
So the person that says that might not have understood that there is a better standard. So that's still the awareness creation in the country, the information that needs to be passed to the people to be confident on that. Because then they are currently investors investing into one thing, and you only trust whatever you trust, that's where you put your money in. I think we need to build trust for the renewable energy opportunities for household power supply, and it will come. But I think as the costs also for fossil fuel sources are increasing, you will see the move towards renewable energy.
Yes.
Yes.
And with the crisis currently going on, you see how the cost of diesel and the cost of petrol has gone up as well. So people are feeling the pinch. Financing is one of the reasons I think people haven't really jumped in, because their banks are not willing to lend in this space.
Yes.
Sterling and a few other banks have done a very good job in trying to really work in the space. Why do you think other banks haven't jumped in at the same level they've done in other sectors?
Well, I have the feeling, because I see banks as private sector. I have the feeling that private sector moves where money is, right?
Of course.
So
They're doing a business.
So they're doing business. So at the end of the day, I think it is, whether it's public awareness or whether it's their understanding, their risking systems to know that there is money here. And this is where, of course, government can also support a bit. But I believe that ultimately, once they are fully aware of the opportunities there, they would invest. So I think we should, first of all, I mean, we started also through Nigerian Support Program. We supported banks in the past decade as well. I think the likes of Sterling, that
I remember the workshop back in 2017.
Exactly.
The Sterling Bank
Exactly.
office in Lagos.
Exactly. So even some of these mini grids that are being built, even if they have foreign capital in it, they still have their own debts, the private sector that are doing the mini grids, plus some of the lendings they did here in country, right? Because it's a blend of financing that usually works for them. So we needed to convince the banks that this is something that works. And I think as the prices are going up for electricity and coal, the banks that are willing to venture into renewable energy sources will, of course, be, at the end of the day, those first movers that will be able to gain something. But I think there is also some trust issue around citizens, like understanding who is able to pay and not. And that's one of the things I was mentioning. it's important to have a system that works, that where we know who's vulnerable and who's not, and who's capable and who's not. And these things will define the trust, the confidence in the banks to lend to people. And even then, for those that are vulnerable and might not be able, there might be development agencies coming to support with the subsidies and so on. So I think data about citizens also would help the banks in knowing which customers to approach.
Yes, and I think that's where we always land in these conversations. There's a lack of data. There's just because if you don't have data, you cannot create a credit profile for America or for my colleagues, or so it's just really hard to know. You have to now use different ways to determine how to lend, and that gets a bit tricky.
And that also makes it more expensive.
Precisely. Yes. One of the other aspects of solar on rooftops is just the importation duties that are attached to solar. I know the government has worked really hard to reduce those duties over a few years ago. Are those waivers still on? Because now we're seeing obviously an uptick in the demand for panels and batteries.
So my team worked, or is still working, even with customs on import processes and so on for renewables and energy efficiency equipment into the country. And you're aware that it's also the Ministry of Finance that is making the rules and regulations, at least finally approving if there should be an import duty or waiver, right? I believe that progress has been made in the past years. There was a time there was a waiver, but also when you come to customs, it wasn't too clear, because maybe the private sector, they import something right now, they'll import the same thing next week. There is a duty. The next time there is no duty. So it was difficult for them to.
So is that because customs also has a revenue number they're trying to make?
No, I think it is the duty of customs to create revenue that they want to make. But I think what we did with customs on the import process, for example, was to make it publicly available how the HS codes, the definition of what you're importing, whether there is duty or not on it. And you could click yourself through on their website to know exactly what you will pay or not.
Interesting.
Because the problem is also knowledge, lack of knowledge about what you're importing. What I can tell you from all we learned is that if you're importing batteries, for example, it could be different. If you're importing solar panels, it could be different. Charge controllers, different. If you're importing a complete set of power plant with including all these things, there might be no duty on it. So, of course, in the country, customs complain also that they are facing that people say that things are for power plants. At the end of the day, the things land in the market. So I think it's an oversight function, responsibility. It is a regulatory thing. But what we've tried to do together with the Nigerian government and customs is to make sure it is easier for people to understand how to import. And then it will be the decision of the government to either waive or not. But there needs to be a clear definition first. And government can base it also on the income revenue requirement of the country to raise it, to reduce it, depending on how the context is and how much is being imported, how saturated the market is, and how it wants to support, let's say, the more vulnerable people or not. So I think the main work is understanding the process, defining what is being imported, and then the decisions on whether to add or reduce or waive import process can be something that can always be changing depending on the situation of the country.
Yeah, and the point you made around ensure that there's a bit of planning with the government to see revenue requirements is something that's important, because one thing you see is because all these assets are acquired in foreign currency.
Exactly.
It reduces how much FX it's in the country.
Yes.
But thankfully, a few companies have started to manufacture panels here, and there's more momentum towards that as well. And then some of them have even started to sell panels across border. So those things are important, that we try to create jobs here and not just benefit from more power. Just last question. I want to just pivot back to energy transition as we close. What advice do you have for policymakers? You talk to policymakers all the time, right? But just from after all of these years of working in the space, what advice do you have for policymakers in Nigeria, and how can we get energy transition right? What are the steps? What must come first?
Well, there are two things for me. One is communication. The second is participation. So I believe that when the government engages with the citizens and communicates clearly with them about the changes that will come, not only the benefits, but also the trade-offs, right? You need to tell your citizens the truth about, we are going to change this to this. This is what will come out of it. There'll be new jobs, new opportunities. Maybe the electricity will be a little bit more expensive or core in this way or the other, but it's clear. And then you make it publicly available, for the people, and make sure they are participating in this communication, right? You make sure you offer it in languages, in platforms that are easy, inclusive spaces. Some of the work we do in the Northeast, these are the things we work on. We make sure we have it in different languages. We go to communities to inform them and tell them there is an impact coming, and this is how it will look like. And I'll allow them to have that conversation. Of course, it will not eradicate the impact, but they will feel that they participated and understood what could come. And they would start with you already raising their concerns of the impact. And you could, in your policy making already, include some of the good ideas as a government you have, to reduce the impact on the citizens. And then in that way, you did not only communicate, you're asking them to bring in their input, so that at the end of the day, when the policy stands, it's a policy that is accepted by everyone, and you work on it together. Because it will, just like I told you, other countries have done it, Egypt, Germany. You would always need to say where you're going to your citizen and what will happen. And then it will be better for you as a government to suggest solutions, and then clearly define the roles of each person and what you as a government are going to do, what the citizens will need to do, and what the private sector, for example, will need to do. I think this is what we call Einmal eins in German. So this is the grassroots, the beginning, the backbone of any form of reform you want to make. Because if people do not trust what you are doing, what you will see is resistance. Next thing will be delay. Projects will not happen if also private sector is not confident in not only your communication to the citizens, but also in your communication of your reform. So any reform you are doing also needs to be very clear. You see, we have the Electricity Act. All regulatory frameworks across countries will always, there is no regulation you do and you will not find one thing that needs to be reviewed,
Of course, yeah.
right?
Definitely.
But you do it in a way that from the beginning you get feedback in a way that people are confident it can work. So as you're communicating to citizens, you're communicating to the private sector, telling them this is what we are putting together, and you put your money on this. And so when you have confidence with citizens, confidence with investors, then I think you can roll out, because then everybody will start participating.
So this really just boils down to getting, like we said earlier, government to take the lead to begin this communication process, meet the different cadres of people. And if done succinctly and correctly, we should start seeing some push in this aspect.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, energy transition will affect people's lives. And the only challenge is if you leave anyone behind, whether through information or through understanding what the impact will look like. There's this thing that's usually called a participation paradox. People, after you take a decision that impacts their life, is when they start feeling the impact. That's when they realize what has happened. And that's when they start talking. So you need to tell them the impact story earlier so that they can participate if they have any objection or any idea or there any solution to put on the table. Right.
Interesting, Duke. This has been super, super insightful. I think you mentioned a phrase in German a minute ago. Say that again.
Einmal eins, which is the basics, so to say. It's 1 times 1. It's like when you are in primary school, you learn 1 times 1 is equal to 1. This is the most simple mathematical, so to say, multiplication. And this is what we use in German as an adage for the most easiest thing, the ground, the basic thing you have to mention to the people, so to say, or you have to communicate. That's what I was trying to say, is the 1 times 1 of schooling of reforms, so to say. Yes.
It must be nice to be trilingual, Duke. Thank you so much for the time on. This has been very insightful, and I'm sure we'll have you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you all.